Hi, welcome to Social Work Live. This is our last show of the season. I'm Michael Friedman. I am the host. I also have been teaching health policy and mental health policy here, and each week I have the privilege to interview someone or several people who are very interesting from our community. Today, we have with us Lauren Gates, who is the director of the Workplace Center here at Columbia, and we're going to talk a bit about vulnerable adolescents and maybe talk a bit about the so-called school-to-prison pipeline. So what is the Workplace Center?
Well, the Workplace Center is all about how to help people with challenging life circumstances get and keep jobs. It's really all about how to help individuals connect with economic self-sufficiency and meaningful careers. And so what I mean by that, people with challenging life circumstances, it may be people with mental health conditions, it may be people with physical disability, at risk of homelessness. But over the more recent years, it really has focused on vulnerable youth and the challenges they face transitioning into the adult world of work.
So who are the vulnerable youth? What do you mean by that?
Well, vulnerable youth have a lot of these life circumstances I just described, like physical disability or mental health conditions, but they also experience substance abuse, gang involvement, and are very likely to be part of the child welfare system, foster care system, and juvenile justice involvement.
So what criteria do you use? You say they're likely to be part of the foster care system. Are you reaching out into the foster care system to try to connect with the kids there?
Yeah, exactly. We work directly with youth who are in foster care and the juvenile justice system to help them become career ready, to help them gain the skills and knowledge they need to be successful in the world of work.
I want to come back to that, but do you also reach out to gang members? You mentioned that these kids could be involved in gangs.
We don't directly reach out to gang members, but many of these young people are in gangs. They are gang members.
So they're in the foster care system, and they're also in the gang system.
Correct, and it's one of the reasons why they may be in the juvenile justice system, because of their gang activity.
So part of what's going on here is we've got kids who are involved with several systems.
Exactly, and have this usually a lot of these factors all at once, which make them particularly at risk with respect to moving into the world of work. Because what happens is that these are the individuals who are most likely to drop out of high school. And as we know in today's labor market, you really can't compete without at least a high school diploma or a high school
I don't even think you can get into the military anymore without a high school diploma.
I think you're right.
And that has been a route out for many kids over the years, but you got to finish high school.
Right. But those in the juvenile justice system, even that's an issue. It's on a case-by-case basis. The military will review their juvenile justice history to make the determination about whether they can join.
So some of these kids can't get in.
Some of them can't get in.
So these are kids whose life course is likely to be what? They're in gangs, they're involved with drugs, they may have mental health problems, they are dropping out of school. This doesn't sound like a good future.
No, so that if we're talking about the vulnerable youth who are actually in the child welfare system, then these are most likely youth who are in the juvenile justice system, in which case they are in detention or in a residential facility where they're basically captive to different kinds of supports and to attending school and getting other kinds of services to help them sort out the issues that brought them into the system. If they are brought into the foster care system, then they are placed with a foster family and also given a network of supports to help them again with the issues that brought them into the system through a foster care agency.
So let's just take this one at a time. You've got some kids who are in the juvenile justice system, which is a polite way of saying they got in trouble with the law in one way or another.
Right.
And some of that can be serious, some of it is not so serious, but these are kids in trouble with the law. So
Right.
what do you do that the juvenile justice system doesn't do?
Well, traditionally, career services has not been part of the child welfare services. That it's not looked upon.
Wait. Say that again. Career services.
Is not part of the child welfare system.
Good. We're raising kids, but we're not guiding them towards work.
Right.
That's an interesting way to run a child welfare system. But
that has
go
been
ahead.
changing.
Okay.
And they recognize the importance of preparing the older adolescents, all adolescents, to be able to move into the world of work. And the problem is that they have the idea that that's good without an understanding of how to do it.
Uh-huh.
And so what we've done at the Workplace Center through the research and program evaluation and through our practice experience is actually develop an evidence-informed, developmentally appropriate career services program that helps these young people gain the skills and knowledge they need to be successful.
Let me just stop there for a second. Evidence-informed, developmentally appropriate. So what does that mean?
Unbundle that for you.
Right.
Well, I want to start with the developmental part, because one of the main reasons career services do not work for adolescents is that they take adult programs and try to fit adolescents into them. And it just doesn't work. It doesn't take into account that these young people are often very disrupted in their vocational development. And vocational development, it's like any other developmental process, like emotional development or physical development. There are stages, and they're required. You have to go through them. So, for example, think of like a 3 or a 4-year-old. This is the time where they first understand that work is something different than other things you do. It's not the same as playtime. It's not the same as rest time. And so you see the typical thing of a little kid, they see a fire engine go by and they pretend they're a firefighter. And then you kind of move along and you go into middle school. And
now, a lot of that happens in the family.
Right.
Right? So I
Or in the
remember my
community.
daughter at the age of 3 or so, and she
Right.
had this little play center that looked a little bit like a briefcase. And
Right.
she'd walk around the house saying, "I'm going to a meeting."
Exactly. And that's a great example of where you're awakening to the idea of there's this concept of work. And then you get to like middle school. And this is where you begin to understand what you're good at, what you're not good at, what you like, what you don't like. And the important step here is that you begin to compare your abilities against the requirements of a different profession. So this is where you say, okay, I really love athletics, but I'm totally clumsy. I can't stay
Right.
on my feet. Or I really love science and I'm really good at it. And so this is a really important stage for exploring what's out there and then understanding what's the best match for you as an individual. And then we go along a little bit further, and now we're into the adolescence and to the older adolescents and young adults, and that's where the hands-on experience comes in. That's where you have to get into the world of work, and you need to try it out to see if what you think you're good at and what you like, you really are. And what happens to vulnerable youth is they're disrupted in that process. They don't go through that ability, like you're saying, through their families or through the community or through their schools to be exposed to the options, to learn what they're good at, to understand their own capabilities so that they can begin to make a match to a profession.
All right,
and
so
move
now how do
along.
you address this developmental
So
shortfall?
So what we do is that through the way that we've constructed the program, it helps to repair that disruption by allowing that career exploration to take place, and it's very structured. They actually get online and they do an interest profiler, and it helps to identify how their interests translate into different professions, and then help them research what's involved in those professions and whether they like it or not, and then help them to figure out how to move towards preparing themselves for that profession. What's key here also for young people is not, career services does not separate the employment piece from the educational piece, because there's no point in having a career goal if you don't have the education and training needed to actually move towards that goal. So it also really works with young people to figure out what sort of training or education is needed and to get them the support.
All right, so now I'm
to
trying
do
to
that.
picture this. All right, we got a gang kid,
Mm-hmm.
all right, 15-year-old kid,
Mm-hmm.
fair enough,
Mm-hmm.
has gotten involved with a gang,
Mm-hmm.
and now you're going to get this kid to go online,
Mm-hmm.
to take a preference test,
Mm-hmm.
and then to go on, stay online, and to look into these different kinds of
Well,
jobs
that's
that
just-
might interest them.
That's just one step along the way.
Yeah.
That's not the, that doesn't
Now,
consume.
even strikes me as difficult to do to begin with, but
It's not. These sites are youth-friendly.
Uh-huh.
They're specifically developed for young
Right.
people, and they're specifically developed for young people who may have challenges. They're very sensitive to that. So it sounds more complicated and time-consuming than I think.
well, that's
It
really
really
interesting.
is.
I interviewed Desmond Patton earlier in the year.
Oh, mhm.
And Desmond, as you know, is very interested in the use that gang members make of the social media and how they
exactly.
communicate with it. So it may be that I have some sort of old-fashioned idea of what it's like to be a gang member and using the internet, that they're using it anyway. Yeah?
Exactly.
So that's-
But I think the point here is that these young people, as we said at the beginning, have this whole constellation of issues that are barriers to moving forward in school and work. Those have to be attended to simultaneously while you're gaining the career-related skills and knowledge. You can't ignore the fact that somebody is in a gang, or that they're substance abusing, or that they have a mental health issue, or that they are experiencing all sorts of trauma and abuse in their lives. That needs to be attended to, maybe perhaps in a clinical realm or in other kinds of wraparound supports. Career services are non-therapeutic. They are not clinical.
Right.
They don't deal with those
Right.
issues. But those issues must be attended to. But on the career side, what gets the gang member is that what works in our favor, and it goes back to the vocational development, we have them, it's programmed, it's in the DNA at that moment where they're consumed with what they want to be when they grow up. That
Interesting.
formation of
Right.
identity and what's important, and, you know, buried under all of their issues, they're really still in their heart. And when you can get there, you see them light up. That exploration of, well, what do you want to do? Well, you know what? You can do that. And they get very excited.
Well, that's really interesting. That's really interesting.
And so this is an instance where the developmental process is actually working in our favor, and when we're in working with adolescents, as opposed to maybe adults where they're sort of like beaten down by the systems and they've sort of lost that spark.
I'd love to know more about what specifically you do with these kids, but I think we also probably just don't have time to get into that level of detail. Again, we hear all the time these days about the school to prison pipeline
Right.
for the kinds of kids that you're talking about. Maybe less for the kids with serious emotional disturbance than for kids who are in foster care, kids who are coming out of tremendous poverty, kids who've gotten caught up in gangs and so forth. Do you have anything, guidance to offer the school system, the child welfare system, what they should be doing to make childhood lead to a successful adulthood instead of what so often happens?
Well, I think that there are two things that I think are very important. One is on the individual level and the kind of support that you provide to each individual child. I think it's a false separation between the career work and the educational work. And so as I was mentioning before, and I think that understanding among educators that academic achievement is actually reinforced by the career readiness preparation. I think they have a statistic that shows that for at-risk young people who participate in career readiness while in high school are much more likely to graduate high school, go on to
Right.
post-secondary education, and are actually 5 times more likely to graduate with a bachelor's degree than their peers who don't have career readiness. So it actually supports the academic achievement. So integrating those career services into the curriculum is very, very important.
So that's one point.
That's one point. And that's on the individual level.
Right.
And so that's working with the school systems and coordinating that with the social service systems to provide that wraparound support that I mentioned earlier. But the second thing is on the systems level. You really have to, and that's a big order, I know, but you really have to change the systems that is touching the lives of these young people. And so, for example, I've been working very closely with the juvenile justice system here in New York City, where we're looking at how to integrate career services throughout the continuum of the experience in the system. So right from the minute you enter, they're not talking about, okay, you did bad, you know, what are we going to do with you? Start pulling out our hair because you're such a trouble to us. But rather, okay, what is it you're interested in doing, and how are we going to connect you with these positive things and make sure you stay connected to whatever's positive in your life to get you as you move through the system. And so right from intake and detention through residential placement through aftercare, we're looking at how to get continuity around that career component. In the same way, I think we need to, so that's within the juvenile justice system, and as I was describing, that change needs to happen in the educational system and among employers, and we can't forget them in this equation. Right. And in making those pathways to employment, they've got to understand what the schools and what the child welfare system are doing. They've got to get it, and they've got to then help to build those pathways to employment.
I'd love to come back to that, but we have some questions.
Okay.
So we might as well move to that. Is it hard to find good foster parents? Wouldn't they be apprehensive if a child has been in the juvenile justice system or involved with a gang?
I think that's an excellent question. The influence of the caregivers is enormous in this picture. One of the things that has always struck me is that no matter how horrible the family life is, it is the single most influential factor in making a decision around what career you're going to do. And so we need the understanding and the buy-in of those caregivers, and to help them understand how to support the career development of the young people that they take into their home. It is hard, but in fact, another thing that works in our favor is that often the kinds of career services we're promoting for the young people apply to their own lives. And so they have an interest in learning about it and connecting with us around that.
I think there's another question, but I can't see it. There it is. Does this program help these kids to find clinical support?
Well, it needs to be in partnership with clinical support. Again, the career services is not a clinical program. It's non-therapeutic. It is what every adolescent needs to know, regardless of who they are, regardless of foster care status, juvenile justice status, or any other kind of condition or issue that that young person has. It's the universal piece of vocational development that all adolescents need.
Well, one thing I would say about what you just said is you say it's non-therapeutic. I'd challenge that. I'd say it is therapeutic in that it has a very positive effect on the mental health and emotional status of these kids.
Well, that's interesting that you say that, Michael, because in the voc rehab field, they have a saying, which is work is outcome, work is treatment. And work can have a very therapeutic effect.
Yeah.
So for people with serious persistent mental health conditions, work is a really important part of their support.
Many years ago, in a previous century, when I was working with seriously and persistently mentally ill adults and supervising a lot of volunteers, most of whom came to us because they really wanted to be psychotherapists. And I used to say to them, stop.
Right.
You're not here to be a therapist. There's a distinction between the therapeutic and the therapistic. Right? Therapeutic is what helps.
Right.
Therapistic is a style of interaction which may or may not help.
Exactly.
And it's the same thing here.
Right.
But you're saying that they're having clinical services is something that can be useful to them.
Very much so. you have to coordinate, and in fact it's an evidence-based practice, to coordinate the clinical services with the vocational services.
And you're able to find good clinical services here in New York in enough quantity to make these connections?
You know, I don't know if I can really evaluate that
Okay.
totally. I think what happens is that the clinicians need a lot of education. That we get the response of, oh, work, this person isn't ready for that. That's too stressful, or that'll take away from the other service goals.
From the
that we have.
therapeutic work they're
From
doing.
the therapeutic role, or even things like reunification with the family,
Right.
or whatever the foster care goals
Right.
are, or the goals of the. And there needs to be education around that to help that piece.
And I think that's a remarkable statement and a remarkably important statement, that often in the clinical professions we are ignoring the importance of work in people's lives.
Right. That's exactly right.
I may have overstated it, but why not? We have another question. This is I don't understand this question, so we'll. Have restorative justice programs been effective in reducing recidivism rates and improving career educational outcomes for at-risk youth involved in the juvenile justice system? So I, for one, am not sure what a restorative justice program is. Are you?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what they're thinking of here. I think that the point is that there are a lot of alternatives to incarceration. So restorative justice involves or programs that involve where the victim and the perpetrator have a chance to meet and discuss and share.
Restore their relationship.
Well,
Maybe.
In a way, right. But that there are lots of alternatives to incarceration. And actually, the impact of these alternatives in terms of the rigorous evidence base, I think, is only beginning to emerge because the programs are new.
Right.
But it makes a lot of sense that when you have community-based programs and programs where people are not removed and not isolated and not taken out of the mainstream of community life, that staying connected to the positive parts of the community are easier.
And a lot of these kids, you said, are in foster care, and if they're in foster care, there's probably been an indication of child abuse or neglect of one kind
Exactly.
or another. And so the relationships between the kids and the parents, I would imagine, are
Right.
highly complicated with
Right.
the great affection that kids continue to have for their parents usually,
Right.
yes,
So-
and also the dangers and risks of those relationships.
The youth tend to fall into two camps. Either they're in the child welfare system because of abuse and neglect, or the parents just lose control.
Right.
They love their kids, they're giving it the best shot they possibly can, but they just can't manage the child. So the child has either gotten involved in a gang and they just couldn't stop it from
Right.
happening, and it just is out of
So
control.
they still seek PINS petitions, person in nudity supervision,
exactly.
that still exists?
Yes.
I'm a few years away from this, as
No,
you
no,
can
it's-
tell. So they go to court to have somebody else, in effect, try to take control of a kid
Right.
who they're not able to control.
Right.
And a lot of them then end up in the juvenile justice system.
Or in foster care.
Right. But it's, I think, important to know that some of the kids in juvenile justice are there not because of having committed a crime, but because their parents have said, we can't deal with this anymore.
Right. And what we call a crime, remember, juvenile justice, it's not the crimes that are at the worst end of the spectrum.
Right.
If you've committed a felony, you're not in the juvenile justice system.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right.
Even under the change in law, so that,
Right. So raise the age doesn't mean that no 16 or 17-year-old goes into the adult court system anymore.
yeah.
It's evaluated in the youth part of adult court. And the youth court judge makes the determination of whether the young person can be sent to family court and adjudicated as a juvenile or stays in the
So the
adult
kids
system.
that you see from the juvenile justice system are not the kids who are making headlines.
Typically not. It depends in what, well, I don't know the answer to that one, really.
Well, I'm just thinking in
Because
terms of major felonies. You know, what
they're
we see
not
on
ma-
television are murderers who
No,
walked
that's-
up to somebody and just
no.
popped them.
No. These are people who are juvenile delinquent, so that truancy is a huge issue, uncontrollable behavior in school,
Right.
which is one of the things that starts that
Right.
pipeline that you mentioned. It may be fighting or a lot of drug-related crime.
Right. So, I mean, I'm just thinking it's a lot of redeemable kids.
Absolutely.
Right? Because if you watch television, watch the television news, you see some of these kids come up on screen and you say, oh my, right?
Yeah,
But these are really a lot of redeemable kids.
that's right. And
More questions?
I just want to make one
Sure.
point as well. We are talking a lot about foster care and juvenile justice as the examples of vulnerable youth, but it's really a group that's bigger than that. In this group are what they call the out-of-school, out-of-work young people who, from the employment perspective, have so much trouble connecting with the world of work. And so it may be people who don't have the severity of issues that the youth do in the child welfare system, but actually it's just youth on a continuum where they kind of go in and out of that system.
But being out of work at a certain age, not good for your future.
Not good for your future.
HBO is premiering the documentary Foster tonight at 8 p.m. I understand it explores the often misunderstood world of foster care. Would you recommend that we watch? First question. Why do you think this issue is being featured in the mainstream media right now? Is it because of the numbers of kids in the system?
I haven't seen it, so I don't know if it's good or not, but I am going to watch it. I think helping to understand foster care and the different perspectives that are offered to us is very helpful. I'm not sure what's bringing this to light right now because the numbers of youth in foster care is actually declining. And every year it's been going down significantly because of the change of policy, particularly in New York, to keep young people in foster care as short a time as possible. And so what we have right now is that kids who are very young, the infants and the young children, they may be in care certainly for less than 90 days, that's the objective, to really get them in and out and to provide that support to the families. I think what's promoting a lot of attention to the older youth is that it's harder to get them in and out, and they tend to linger in the foster care system more than the younger ones.
Well, it's really hard to find foster care parents, I would think, for some of the teenagers who
Right.
have been through many homes already and
Exactly.
have gotten in trouble with the law. And,
That's exactly right.
was the first question we had about some of that difficulty. Here's another question. I run an alternative to detention program with adolescents. Thank you. How could I, as a service provider, access this resource? How are youth connected and referred to this program? So they want you.
Which is great. So there's a couple different routes. We are working under contract with ACS, the Administration for Children's Services, our child welfare agency here in the city. And you would contact ACS as a program provider and ask how to get access to any support around career services, wherever that the leadership within the agency that governs or oversees your program. The other is that the program can contact the workplace center directly, and
how would they do that?
they would call us up or look for
At
us
what
online
telephone
at
number?
Workplace Center
Well, go ahead. Workplace Center.
at columbia.edu.
Okay, and is there a telephone number for them to call? Should they do it online?
They should really go online. But if you...
So it's Workplace Center at columbia.edu.
That's us.
Very good. Another question for Dr. Gates. Well, that's not too surprising.
But-
Have participants at the Workplace Center... What? Is there a follow-up question? I'm sorry. Is there a way youth could access your services remotely?
We are not a direct service provider, so we do not work with the young people directly. What we do is we build the capacity among the staff at a provider agency or at the employer or work within the public sector agency. So the young people would have to work directly through an agency that's got the program already. The program is called Young Adult Work, WORC, which stands for Work Opportunities for Rewarding Careers. So if you look to see which agencies have been trained in young adult work, the youth can do it that way.
So just to go back to the previous question then, the agencies could get in touch with you.
Right, not
Right.
young people.
And then you could help them figure out what to do as a program.
Correct.
But not the young people directly. And we
Correct.
have now another question about whether you are using former young people as part of the staff to the services that you provide. So I would assume not for the services you provide, which are consulting services, but what about the agencies that have...
Well, actually, we do rely a lot on young people to give us feedback, and we do include them in the development of our tools. Because if you don't include the people who you're trying to support, we feel that it loses its full potential. And so we always, at different points along the process, convene groups of young people who are in the child welfare system, who are going through our programs, to give us feedback and to help us modify the programs. We are really involved in program evaluation, and we've also had a number of efforts where the young people actually help us develop the evaluation design and our data collection tools.
So that's really
So we're using
really
the right
interesting.
language.
I'm just have a sense here that there are some people who are watching who are really concerned about how a young person who's in trouble can get connected with a program that will help them develop their work opportunities. And again, just to be clear, they don't do that directly with you.
No.
So they need to find a program that's using the program that you've designed.
Right. So if they are in foster care or juvenile justice, that is the role of the case planner, to tap into the resources here in New York City. And ACS has compiled a lot of the resources related to workforce development and career services, but that we're very fortunate that New York City is extremely what we call resource rich. There are a lot of programs. And it is important that the case planners, when approached by a young person, make sure that they really do their due diligence, that that program that they're referring the young person to is a good match, that they understand that this may be a vulnerable young person, that it's not an adult program masquerading as a youth program, for
And if
example.
they don't get a good response from a case planner,
Right.
what can they do?
Well, the other piece of the services that's built into our system are what they call youth development specialists. And for the older youth in the system, the youth development specialists, that's their job, to provide the independent living skills and to help support the young people in getting the vocational skills.
And how do
that
they
need.
get to a youth development?
Again, through their case planner. They should be doing that anyway. If they're not getting those services, then something's wrong at the agency.
That's what I'm asking you, actually.
It's a
I'm assuming that
required-
sometimes this doesn't go well.
Right.
I don't know why I assume that, but I'm assuming that sometimes it doesn't
Yeah.
go well.
Yeah, it's a
And-
required service.
And sometimes, what can they do if it's not going right.
Right. They should really be talking to their case planner to connect them with those resources. If you're looking for resources outside the, are you asking like outside the child
Suppose the
welfare
case
system?
planner doesn't do the job they're supposed to do. By some wild chance. Suppose they don't do the job they're supposed to do. What can a person do then to get beyond the case planner and try to get what they think they should be getting?
What I would do if I was in the child welfare system, and even though this sounds maybe like it wouldn't be productive, I would look at the youth tab on the ACS website, and that they list resources there.
Okay,
And I
so
would
the youth
ask-
tab on the ACS
Right.
website can lead to
I
people who
would
can help.
ask an adult that you trusted and that you thought could give you good guidance, a teacher, somebody in the community, somebody in a faith-based organization, and say, how do I get connected with somebody who can help me think about what kind of career I want?
Okay.
And to use their informal network.
I think it's always important to have a fallback.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. We have two more questions. Are foster parents to youth, I assume that means adolescents, involved in the juvenile justice system specially selected? Or do they just have more experience, more supports available to them?
Okay, so in the juvenile justice system, interestingly, most of the young people are not in foster care. And the families we work with are the birth families. That if a person is in foster care and goes into the juvenile justice system, it's kind of a difficult circumstance where typically that foster family says, I don't want that kid back again. So that after they leave the juvenile justice system, they're placed in a new family. So there isn't that continuity with a foster care family while the young person is in the juvenile justice system. It's a rare foster family that sticks by the young person if they go into the juvenile justice system. In terms of the special training, I don't know about that, but many people in foster care have a history of juvenile justice involvement. So the idea that just being in the system requires you to have special knowledge and understanding is not really the case. For many of the adolescents who are in foster care, the foster care parents do really need to have some understanding of these issues. And right now, I don't know if there's any specialized training for those foster parents.
Last question. In California, if a foster youth commits a crime, the juvenile delinquency court and dependency court will come together and decide who should take the child and which court will be the most beneficial to the child. A lot of times they will be on probation, but under dependency court, not delinquency, which makes sure that they don't enter juvie and still receive foster youth services and the support that comes from it. How does New York make decisions which court will take jurisdiction? Do we have the same distinction here in New York between?
Well, there are young people who are on probation as the outcome of the event. You know, if they're arrested, that one of the options is to go on probation, and that's handled by the Department of Probation.
But does that come out of family court, or is?
If it's a juvenile delinquent, yes.
Yeah, it's family court.
Yeah.
All right.
I think. Actually, I don't know, and I better not say.
All right. So I don't know
I'm
either.
not
I would
quite
just
sure
say to
about
the
the-
person asking about California, every state is different with what
Yeah.
kinds of courts it
Right.
has and how those
Yeah.
courts work together.
I
and
don't want to
neither of
misspeak.
us knows.
My expertise is
how it
what
works.
happens to them with career services and not the intricacies of
Right.
how our court system works.
Which can be very complicated.
Right.
So this is it. We're wrapping up. I want to thank Lauren Gates for coming here today.
Thank you.
It's been a very interesting conversation. Thank you very much. And I'm going to introduce Richard Harra now, who is going to replace me. I'm not retiring. I'm just moving to Baltimore. So I won't be here anymore. I will miss this, and I was really hoping that I was irreplaceable. but it turns out that I am replaceable. And here is Richard Hara, who is going to replace me next year. I don't know if you have anything you want to say.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're going to interview me or if I'm supposed to interview you at this point.
But just say a few things.
I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to follow in your footsteps, to help host this program and to really showcase, I think, the tremendous work that's being done not only here at the School of Social Work but in our field generally. Just listening to today's talk about just the interconnections between what's happening at the direct practice level, how programs are run and sustained, and also the implications for larger policy, I think are just so important to our audience here and to all of us who are thinking about social work and where we're going in the 21st century.
So it sounds like I can be replaced. And you're going to do a terrific job. And, we not only do the social work school on this show, we also have some episodes which are called Just Societies Live, in which we bring in people from other parts of the university as well. So it's a really interesting experience. I must say I've met some very interesting people, both here at the school and from other parts of the university. And as an adjunct, I don't get to meet many people at the school. I come in, I teach, and I go. So it's been really interesting for me, and I think it will be for you as well. So thanks for coming on board.
Thank you.
I'll watch you from Baltimore next year. Lauren, thank you very much. She's hidden in the corner for those of you who can't see her. But this was terrific. Thank you very much. And Richard will see you next year. Well, no, you'll see Richard next year. I keep forgetting who sees who on this show. Thanks a lot.